In 2019, YouTube was caught violating the Child Online Privacy Protection Act, or COPPA. Since settling, YouTube has enacted new policies that are meant to serve as a smokescreen so they can dodge responsibility and scapegoat creators. As such, for my own protection, it is my obligation to advise you that this video is not aimed at children. My target audience is not children. Parental discretion is advised. Hey guys, how's everyone doing? This is Sir Jedi Sentinel, and welcome back to Sentinel Reviews. A couple days late, I'm sorry about that, but today we are continuing our look at countermeasures with Series 2, released in June of 2013, directed by Ken Bentley. Countermeasures Series 2 once again stars Simon Williams as Group Captain Ian Gilmore, Pamela Salem as Professor Rachel Jensen, Karen Gledhill as Dr. Allison Williams, and Hugh Ross as Sir Toby Kinsella. Once again, there is a spoiler warning in place because I do these unscripted and I might be discussing spoilers. So, with that in mind, real quick, if you have not heard Countermeasures Series 2 yet and don't want to be spoiled, then in the description box below will be the link to Big Finish's website where you can buy Countermeasures Series 2. Series 2 is also available on Big Finish's Spotify. And I will try to link to that if possible. I don't know how well that worked the first time, so we'll see what happens the second time. But also in that case, too, Countermeasures Series 2 is the last Countermeasures release available on Spotify as of the time of recording this, Monday, August 2nd. So without any further ado, let's just jump right in. Hey guys, real quick before we get into the review proper, I wanted to stick this on as a bookend ahead of it. The story I'm about to be reviewing, I just want to include a quick content warning for my more sensitive viewers, because this story and my review on it will be discussing themes of transphobia. You know, I know how sensitive a topic it is, and I just want to warn you ahead of time that it's coming. And Series 2 opens with Manhunt, written by Matt Fitton. So, after stopping a conspiracy and saving the country, how do we meet the countermeasures team again? Well, Gilmore has been accused of murder and is on the run. Yeah, meanwhile, it's only been a week and Toby has already lined up his replacement, one Captain Asta. There are going to be things I have to spoil about this story, and, given the mystery nature of it, I'm sorry, but yeah, this story hasn't aged well. But let me try to break down the basic plot before we get to that. So, like I said, I think this probably takes place maybe about a month after Series 1, maybe a little longer. It never really gives you a time frame. But yeah, someone influential in the government, a man named Charles Waverly, has been killed. And as I said, Gilmore has been framed of his murder. Gilmore was a friend of the Waverly family, and Charles was his superior officer. So it's been we kind of got a race here. There's really good tension throughout this story. I think one critique I have is that not a lot of it is focused on Gilmore on the run. Like there's a couple scenes where he meets up with Toby, prior to the third act, where his name gets cleared and he's reinstated to the countermeasures team. But aside from the cold open, which is actually pretty spectacular, we don't see a lot of him on the run. Now, as I mentioned, Gilmore has been a friend. The man who was murdered, Charles Waverly, Gilmore was his friend, as well as a friend of the family, including his wife, Lady Catherine, played by Gemma Whelan, who is spectacular in this story, and their daughter, Emma. Stick a pin in Emma. We're going to go back. We're going to get to her later and tie into why this story has aged so poorly. Meanwhile, Rachel and Allison have been kept in the dark investigating the disappearances of scientists who have been found dead and mutilated. I really like Allison in this story. After the events of Series 1, when I mentioned that she had to kill her fiancé because he was trying to overthrow the government, she has been kind of shaken's not the right word, but she's kind of throwing herself into her work pretty obsessively, and she's just been very bitter the entire time, to which Rachel is trying to help her. I think of the team, Rachel kind of gets the least focus in this story. She still has some good moments, like when she confronts Toby over the moving of a prisoner in her care, which Toby wasn't responsible for, but but like I said, of the entire countermeasures team, Toby is kind of the iron fist, and Rachel is the only one really who refuses to put up with it, and which I always love when Rachel stands up to Toby. I'll say it again, she's my favorite character in countermeasures. Um, we also get a new introduction to the team. A new character joins the team. His name is Templeton. He is Toby's number two. Essentially, he's Toby's proxy. He can do a lot of the government stuff in Toby's place, freeing Toby up to have other to do other things. And I hate Templeton. Now, that's not a critique of this story or the character, because by design, you're supposed to hate him. He's very smarmy. He's very oily, in that sort of snake oil salesman kind of way, where it's just, he's got a sort of slimy charm to him that you just kind of wince at every time he speaks. Like, when we first meet Lady Catherine, it's Toby who meets her, and Templeton makes a lot of misogynistic remarks. Anyway, as I also said, there is another character, a young captain named James Asta, who is sort of taking Ian's place within countermeasures, temporarily. Now, I don't want to get into the rest of the mystery. Just know Manhunt is mostly good. I'm going to get into why it doesn't hold up anymore. Because, this story is really transphobic. Like, extremely transphobic. I don't think it was intentional. I want to say that. I'm not sure, but yeah, it just, because even back in 2013, this was a story, this was a plot line, a trope that people kind of used a lot. So, just for context, because of the time frame set in the 60s, Countermeasures is a post-World War II / Cold War era spy thriller. And this story tackles with, very briefly, it'll come back later in the box set, trust me, but this story very briefly tackles with eugenics and how the British government was trying to create super soldiers. So, Emma Waverly and Captain James Asta are the same person. To try and get Emma into the government and, make her a soldier, essentially, because he always wanted a son, Charles Waverly, had eugenics experiments performed on her. And now she can change sex at will. What can I say but yikes? Yeah, this is not aged well, especially made by the fact that she is the villain and she comes across as kind of crazed and kind of extremely crazed. That's no more to say to it than that. Like, the only thing I can say is Countermeasures was set in the 60s, which, by my estimation, if I did my math right, because they also say, it's her gender that changes. Countermeasures is set in the 60s, even though this story is written in 2013. Again, I don't think it's intentional. It just hasn't aged well. But yeah, let me finish my first point first. Countermeasures is set in the 60s. And if I've done my math right, that was before the 40 years and counting worth of research that prove sex and gender are not the same thing, and that the statement there are only two genders is nothing but is actually a myth. So yeah, Manhunt is mostly great except for that one very sore point that's kind of uncomfortable to listen to now. Although the ending is spectacular, the ending doesn't have anything to do with Emma. It's basically what Catherine's role in all this was. And remember in Series 1 how I said Toby was a bastard? Well, starting with this ending scene here, they kind of try to make it ambiguous, but I think they lean too strongly into Toby did it. Yeah, they dial up Toby's being a bastard to 11. And if you can get past that one glaring flaw I talked about, Manhunt is decent. I used to like it a lot more, but again, with just what we know now, it's... Yeah. Next up, The Fifth Citadel by James Goss. So this story opens up with workers in a graveyard, grave diggers. Wow, I can't believe I forgot that word. Falling ill. Basically, what they're doing is this church they're working on was destroyed during the Blitz. So now these grave diggers have to move bodies so the church can be properly demolished. Except there are weird things going on. For example, there are about roughly 200 extra bodies that, according to parish records and such, are unaccounted for, as well as the gravediggers falling mysteriously ill. Meanwhile, in the London Underground, the Tube, the workers who go in after the trains and clean up the tunnels are also falling ill. What's going on? Well, Countermeasures is on the case. The team divides up here. So, Toby and Rachel are investigating the Tube, and Ian and Allison are investigating the graveyard. And first of all, I really want to comment on that. So far, whenever the team has been divided up, it's usually been Rachel and Allison who have been paired off. So the dynamic of Ian and Allison is absolutely refreshing, and I really enjoyed them together. Simon Williams and Karen Gledhill have great chemistry, and their dynamic is so fun. It's kind of cute. Anyway, what is going on? Well, it turns out during World War II, a series of bunkers were built underground. So that, 4 citadels, they were called. So that in the event of a nuclear holocaust, the high-ranking officials could retreat to a safe place. And it's been rumored that a 5th citadel had recently been built. Well, it's not just rumor, it actually was built. And it's powered by a nuclear reactor, which is leaking. So that's where this story picks up. Toby and Rachel, in their own plotline, actually find the Citadel and find out it's run by a woman named Elizabeth Bradley, an old friend of Toby's, played by Celia Imrie, who is absolutely spectacular. But it's Celia Imrie. She's always spectacular. Anyway, so basically what happened is Elizabeth's team was doing drills. They were running drills to make sure the Citadel was ready if it needed to be. And they realized that, the reactor was leaking and everyone was getting sick from radiation poisoning. And they told the government what was going on. And it became clear that instead of helping them, the government abandoned them. And now, Elizabeth, a dying woman with nothing left to lose, is giving them an ultimatum. Total worldwide nuclear disarmament, or she will overload the reactor and flood the London Underground with radiation. And I have to admit, once we get to that point, I think that revelation happens around the halfway point. The story kind of loses steam a little bit because it's a lot of wheel spinning. Toby trying to convince Elizabeth that the British government won't listen, let alone the rest of the world. And Elizabeth saying they'll have to. I'm a dying woman. I have nothing left to lose. I will do it. Sorry, there is a fly buzzing around here and it's starting to get really annoying. Meanwhile, in the graveyard, Ian and Allison open a lead-lined coffin containing corpses from the Citadel and find themselves exposed. There really isn't much to talk about in terms of plotline here. It's fairly straightforward, which I suppose, given how intricate Countermeasures can be with its mysteries and its plotlines, I kind of find that a weakness, to be honest, just because I was expecting something more complex. That doesn't make the Fifth Citadel a bad story, and I don't always like complicated plots. It's a case-by-case basis with most everything. But, yeah, there is just something about this story. Once again, the ending is spectacular, once again proving that Toby is a right bastard when he wants to be. And we get a little bit more of Templeton here. He is a main character up through Series 4. And his role slowly builds up over time. In these first 2 stories, again, he's just Toby's proxy, But, we get a little more of that smarminess that just makes you want to punch him. he's essentially leading a militia to confront the group in the Citadel. And Ian and Allison, when they meet up with Rachel and Toby, mention that someone let off grenades. So Toby asks Templeton who let off grenades, and he just says so smugly, "Oh, that's not done. I'll figure out who did it." The Fifth Citadel is decent. It's got a simple plot, which is fine. Again, a really good performance from Celia Imrie, and some great moments, but I don't know what it is. I just find it kind of lackluster. Story 3, Peshka, by Kevin Scott and Mark Wright. So, what does it make sense that, at least this far into its run, 6 stories, what does it make sense for a Cold War era spy thriller to do? We're going international! Kind of. So the team is headed to, I think it was either Austria or Amsterdam. I don't remember, but that's not a big deal. Why? Because a Russian chess player wants to defect. Well, not exactly. So first of all, as I mentioned, the team is now going international. And the sound design, it kind of fails because, the sound design, and I do kind of have to wonder how you would do this in a soundscape, just how you would set up, how is this locale different from another? I mean, an alien planet is one thing, but I think it's because the team doesn't interact with many of the locals. Like, I think Allison only meets one person for half a second, and that's it. But yeah, it's just the sound design kind of lets the story down in differentiating from Amsterdam or Austria. Again, I wish I remembered which one it was, and London, because the first 2/3 of this story take place in Amsterdam, and then the last third of it takes place back in London. So basically, a young Russian woman named Anya Barkov is worried for her brother Shurik Barkov's safety, and during his time rounds, what would you call it? While he's there attending an international chess championship, Anya wants to defect and she wants to take Shurik with her. Now, after the first 2 stories, it seems that, and as Ian points out, the countermeasures team is not suited to defection. They aren't trained and stuff. So tensions are a little high. Tempers are short. And it's interesting because you immediately get the feeling that something isn't right. And how to explain it? And every time these incidents happen, there's a music cue. It's very subtle, but it's really effective at what it's doing. And when these scenes happen with that music cue, they're genuinely kind of intense. They're really intense. Seeing the team at each other's throats, a team with such good chemistry and such good working relationships. These people are all friends. They know each other. And the scariest part is the performances are so good, it feels natural. Now, of course, with this defection, the title of the story, Peshka, gives... Excuse me, I drank a soda before doing this. The title of this story, Peshka, gives away what's going on. And, well, if you don't know what a Peshka is, I'm not going to give it away for you. But, again, Peshka, I think that's really my one big critique. The sound design lets it down. It doesn't really set the landscape for where the countermeasures team is. Wow, I barely touched on this story, and I'm already at the wrap-up for it. But that's the thing. Peshka has such a good mystery. It's so intense from start to finish. When I first heard Peshka, I thought it was the weakest story of Series 2. But listening to it again, it's so good. The tension, the performances, the music, not so much the sound design as I kind of talked about, and the third act and the way the story ends is kind of chilling. So, do I have anything more I want to say? Because I try not to do spoilers, and I really don't want to give this one away. In fact, both of these last 2 stories, I don't want to give away because the mysteries in them are just so spectacular. And now the series finale. And given Big Finish's trend, who better to write a finale for a box set than John Dorney? Sins of the Fathers. This story opens with the funeral of a woman named Mary Cleaver. Oh, also, spoilers for Manhunt, by the way. Anyway, this story opens with the funeral of a woman named Mary Cleaver. The only person in attendance is her son, Ray. Now, at the end of Manhunt, Emma actually escaped. And this story opens with her finding Ray, giving him various reports on their shared past. I'll elaborate on that, hopefully, a little bit, before dying. And, eventually, because it was their case, news reaches the countermeasures team that Emma has died. And Toby closes the case, despite the fact that an entire militia was found slaughtered at the site where Emma died. Toby decides the case is closed. And then throughout this story, the team notices that Toby is acting really strangely, keeping even more secrets than usual, dismissing them out of line. So the team decides to take it upon themselves to look into the case personally. I really love Rachel in this story. Every time Ian tells him this isn't an investigation, Rachel has these really cute little responses like, no, he doesn't want countermeasures to investigate, or we're off the clock, we can do whatever we want. Like, I just love how callous Rachel can be to Toby at times. But yeah, eventually it reaches a point where they realize something serious is going on. Oh, I forgot. The story divulges into two plot lines there for a little bit. And I'll get into the other one. So, Rachel and Allison decide to go to Templeton in Toby's place, telling him he may be compromised. And this is really where the smarmy, slimy Templeton, this is really where his true self comes out, because Toby eventually makes a snide remark that Templeton had been gunning for his job. And he really shows it here. He just shows what a slime ball he is. For example, in the climax, when Ian, Rachel, and Allison, I blanked on their names for a second, excuse me, Rachel and Allison try to go into a hospital to rescue Toby and Ian, Templeton tells them they have a limited amount of time before he floods the hospital with nerve gas. And, of course, Rachel and Allison kind of respond with how inhuman that is, and that Toby and Ian are in there, and his only response is, well, then you better hurry. And then, of course, after they leave, he ends the countdown even faster than that. Toby is really interesting in that. Oh, before I forget to that. So, like I said, we meet someone who was sort of put in a similar situation as Emma. Not with the transphobic stuff, thank God, but with his mother anyway was also in the eugenics program, and he was the result. He is essentially a one-man army. Bullets have no effect on him, etc., etc., etc. When Emma was found dead, he was the one who slaughtered the soldiers. Now, the priest who officiated Ray's mother's funeral, and which is where the cold open took place, he is hiding Ray. And it's really brief, but I really like the dynamic between Ray and this priest. Ray keeps saying, I want to save you. I want to help you. And Ray keeps saying, don't bother. Essentially to the point where, Ray is kind of astonished at his actions. He says, you never give up. You're kind of amazing. Don't you know that? Anyone else I would have met by now would have given up on me, but you didn't. It's a shame that the priest dies. And also, even though it's so brief, I think in the total story overall, we've only known this priest maybe 7 minutes. So it's amazing that his death is as effective as it is. Again, there's a really good, thrilling, very gripping mystery to this story that I don't want to get into and I don't want to spoil. But the fact that Toby closed the case prematurely and that he is kind of pursuing Ray himself, and the fact that this story is called Sins of the Fathers, I feel like just talking about it as much as I am is already giving away too much. And again, like Manhunt, the story ends on a really haunting note about kind of about just what a bastard Toby actually is. And now the wrap up. So, before we get into my thoughts on Series 2 as a whole, my ranking for the stories. I would probably say the weakest is the fifth Citadel, and then Manhunt, and then Peshka, and Sins of the Father is the best of the set. Countermeasure Series 2 is a tremendous improvement over its predecessor. Whereas Series 1 was simply great, Series 1 was simply good. Series 2 is fantastic. I think the biggest improvement from Series 1 to Series 2 is the sound design. All across my reviews of Series 1, I talked about the kind of sloppy sound design. I don't know if sloppy is the right word for it, but there'd just be the sequence of noise, and you'd have no idea what's going on. And like I said, they permeated throughout the story, whereas Series 2, every sound that's made, you know exactly what it is. It makes for a much more immersive experience. The performances are still phenomenal, but across the entirety of Series 2, as I hoped I made clear, Hugh Ross as Sir Tobias Kinsella is the standout. We really see the moral gray area Toby operates in, and essentially as he works with the countermeasures team, we kind of see him warm up a little bit. It's kind of interesting because part of it is, him being in the government, he knows what the government is capable of and what it has to do to stay in power. But at the same time, there's this sense of, I need to do this because this is too much for my team to handle. It's a very interesting, like I said, it's a very well done, very interesting characterization. And we're going to continue to see Toby sort of melt and warm up throughout the series. Like, if Rachel is my favorite character in Countermeasures, Toby might be my second favorite. But yeah, like I said, if you liked Countermeasures Series 1, I highly recommend Series 2. And honestly, that's kind of it. Like I said, great stories, minus that one thing that I'm going to stop talking about now. Fantastic performances, especially from guests like Gemma Whelan, who played Lady Catherine in Manhunt, or Celia Imrie in The Fifth Citadel, and so on. And I think, again, compared to Series 1, Series 2 just had a much stronger set of writers. Like, these are all writers whose work I'm familiar with. Matt Fitton, Mark Wright and Kevin Scott, James Goss, and John Dorney, and their contributions are just utterly fantastic. Again, because it does have its issues. If you weren't sure with Series 1, because it's free on Spotify, listen to Series 2. It will really solidify this series for you. And that's kind of all I have right now. Join me at the end of the month. I'm going to try to stick to the schedule this time, when we will look at Series 3. Have you heard Countermeasures Series 2? What were your thoughts on it? Start a conversation in the comments below, and remember to like, comment, subscribe, and click the bell next to subscribe to get notifications when I upload. And in the description box below, along with links to where you can get Countermeasures Series 2, you will find the link to my Twitter where you can follow me and get updates on the channel. This is Sir Jedi Sentinel, and I'll see you guys next time.